This is Vic Chopra of Unincarcerated Productions, and you're listening to Justice Delayed.
You decide what you want to be when you grow up.
It isn't very often that you get to be part of something special when it first starts. But, dear listener, by pushing play on this episode of this podcast, that is exactly what you have done. You're here with me, Cameron Collins, at the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Unincarcerated Productions has teamed up with Jodie and Billy Sinclair to create an entire universe of multimedia projects, and Justice Delayed is the beginning of that relationship. So, what is Justice Delayed? This podcast is an examination of the American criminal justice system and prison industrial complex. Each week, listeners can join Billy and Jodie Sinclair as they tackle difficult topics and come to grips with injustice, corruption, and human rights violations that result from the retributive justice system we have in place. Instead, Billy and Jodie will guide us towards a vision of restorative justice. In this two-part introductory episode to the podcast, you will meet our hosts, authors Billy and Jodie Sinclair, as they tell their amazing, inspiring, and harrowing love story in their own words. When TV news reporter Jody Bell ventured into the death house at Angola State Prison in 1981 to report on the death penalty, she never imagined she would fall in love. But when she met award-winning inmate journalist Billy Sinclair, that's just what happened. What followed was a 25-year battle to free Billy from a corrupt system filled with scandal and injustice. This is Justice Delayed.
You know, over the years, I filed lawsuits against all the ranking parole and pardon board members. I filed against every warden that walked through the prison system, not to mention all the guards. I filed suit against 3 members of the victim opposition. I filed lawsuits and Bar Association complaints against 2 district attorneys, got one of them sanctioned. I had the corrections secretary one day walk into Angola and told me, said, "You're going to have to stop. Your lawsuits are rocking the political foundation of Baton Rouge." He said, "It's going to be some point where you're going to get beyond my ability to protect you. You need to stand down. You need to back away from some of these lawsuits." I sued the chief judge of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, it's amazing. There were attempts made on my life, but it's amazing that someone that litigious and someone who exposed all this wrongdoing and all this corruption would survive. I was a rural redneck boy from North Louisiana, had become one of the most powerful and influential inmates in the prison system. And there's an irony to this, is that the day I made parole, I really didn't know when I heard the last board member say I vote to grant parole. I really didn't understand that I had just been granted parole. So they turned off the monitor and I got up to and was being escorted out of the room where the parole hearing was being held by a monitor teleconference and walked out of the office, the main building, the administration building. And there were a line of young inmates. The facility I was in at that time was in Southwest Louisiana. Most of the inmates there were young, they were Black, and they were gangbangers. And I was old. I was probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, inmates in that prison system. And when I walked out there, these inmates cheering and clapping because the word had already went out that the old man made parole. And that's what they was all saying, the old man made parole. And as I'm walking down the walk, I mean, these young Black inmates coming up, hugging me and doing the fist salute and everything else, the old man made parole. If I ever get married, I want to marry a woman like Jodie Sinclair. I mean, it was just mind-boggling, the reception that I received.
There was one young inmate who stopped to talk to Billy at one point. I don't know if it was right after, but at one point, and he was praising Billy for his autobiography, A Life in the Balance, of Billy Wayne Sinclair's story that came out in 2000. And so now we're years past 2000. But this inmate said that he loved the book. He said he didn't know how to read. He said, I can't read. But my cellmate is reading that book to me, Mr. Sinclair, and he said, if I ever get married, I want a wife like you got.
And the irony, and like most people would not even understand the power, the emotion that was involved in a lot of this. 20 years earlier, in one of the nation's largest and roughest prisons, I had went from a very influential, powerful prison journalist, celebrated inmate, to an FBI informant, to a common snitch for exposing a scandal. There were a lot of inmates that wanted to kill me. 20 years later, an old man, 60, 61 years old, and these young African-American gangbangers from New Orleans looked upon me as a hero, exposing corruption in the system, telling it like it is. Mr. Sinclair, he told it like it is. He did this, he done that, he did this. So it was a powerful thing to go from that transition where my life was at stake to being hailed by young inmates as sort of a hero. So throughout the whole process, there were so many things that happened in Jodie and I's experience that it's hard to comprehend. That's why Balance, when we wrote Balance, that's why we were able in Balance to give a perspective of prison that very few prison books have accomplished. And after Balance came out, I had police officers and college professors, liberal college professors, and law and order police officers telling me it's the best book they read. So that you've done your job when you can take people on that diverse, professionally and politically, and they both like the book.
It took 11 years to write that book. He was writing on the inside. He was sending me, he had a typewriter. He was sending me his stuff. I had a very, very early computer. What were those things called?
Tandy.
I had a
Tandy 1000.
And so that's how we managed to write the book. But about then, in 2000, and we had been married since 1982, I was beginning to think to myself that perhaps he was not going to come home. And so I really, really wanted his story told. I wanted it, as a reporter would say, I wanted it on the record. And that's what the book meant to me, that we got it on the record. So there it was in black and white. And nobody ever filed suit against us because it was accurate. Yeah. And there was no way, that you could do that.
It rocked the correction system. I mean, I was called in by wardens. I mean, it literally rocked the correction system because it exposed so much. But another irony, gentlemen, is that because we've been involved with unincarcerated productions for a while now, and I've gone back over, I've told you about some of these stories I'm writing about, the people I met along the way. And going back and looking at those articles, some of them written years ago, and not only to check the quality of the writing, but to check the accuracy and the factual basis of it. And you write that, and it's like, now I've been out 14. Who was this guy? How in the world, like I told Jodie, how in the world did a country bumpkin spend 40 years in a prison system and survive? Not only survive, but walk out whole. But there's a key to that survival. It was easier to survive in prison than it was in the free world. When I first got out, I told Jodie, I don't know how many times, I'd brag and I'd tell her, if they let me out, put me in the middle of New York City in my underwear, I'd find a way to survive. Well, when I got home to that condo, and I stared out at downtown Houston through all them glowing lights, my first instinct, my gut told me, how in the fuck do I make it here? What is out there for me? I can't, I've never even seen anything like that. How do I readjust. I didn't even know how to turn a computer on. I knew nothing about Texas law. I knew everything about Louisiana law, nothing about Texas. How did I go to work? Fortunately, I had a network of supporters. Jodie, her family, her friends, they all embraced me. And it was through the concerted effort of all these people and our financial ability for me to go to school, to go to the local community college, learn how over the summer after I got out, to learn the internet, to learn how to use a computer. I enrolled in Texas legal classes at the community college, 2 semesters worth. Got a job. Well, actually, before I got a job with a law firm, I interned with the oldest African-American law firm in Houston. They brought me in. So I learned how to function in a law office setting, in a professional setting, something I'd never been exposed to. And that prepared me that when I got a job with the John Floyd law firm, Mr. Floyd and I met and we talked and we agreed after that first meeting. And he told me, he said, I don't know how you can help me, but I know you can. He said, so let's give this 90 days. If after 90 days, we're working okay together, you still like me, I still like you. He said, then we'll go full time. After 3 or 4 weeks, he told me, let's go full time. And so, I've been with him ever since. And he's told me several times, he said, if something ever happened to my firm, to my business, he said, I want you to know, you and I will be the last 2 standing. Everybody will go before you. He said, you'll be the last man with me. But surviving in the free world, learning how to survive in the free world was one of the most difficult challenges I ever faced. And right now I'm still struggling with the difficulty of how to survive in a marriage. Because I got a new warden and never even knew I was going to have one.
That's funny. Unincarcerated Productions is concerned with something that very deeply concerns me, and that is why prisons are not preparing prisoners to return to the free world, since so many of them do. And there are not many opportunities. Billy was extraordinarily lucky because he was married to me, because of the connections that I had, because I had very strong family, because I was living in this very upscale downtown high-rise condo that looked out on downtown Houston like it was New York City lighted up at night. He came home to that. Most inmates, I would say 90% of inmates at least, don't go home to that. They don't go home to opportunities. They don't, Billy worked hard. He made the dean's list at that community college, and he learned enough about Texas law to be able to go to work for this law firm. But I am very interested in seeing prison reform such that it becomes more focused on rehabilitation, on education, on preparing people to return to the free world. And it's not just the free world, as Vic and Spencer often point out, has an attitude about prisoners and about former prisoners that's wrong. But I am one who believes that if you look at how people become criminals, I believe that society creates criminals. I really believe they do. When I look at low-income neighborhoods, the lack of opportunity, the lack of ever being in an upscale place, ever understanding that you could perform there, that you'd be welcome there, that you this, you that. So those are the things that concern me. Prisoners coming home, and when they do, I'm reading on the internet, in terms of Casey Phillips' organization, women communicating with each other on Facebook. Oh, he's got a parole hearing coming up. Can anybody help me? What do I do? Or woman, my son came home. He was gone for 8 years. He doesn't, we're trying to teach him to use a cell phone. And they themselves don't have the ability to do what I did. So prison reform is extremely important to me, and showing people that, oh, you want to know why people become criminals? Well, society creates criminals because of the way that it is structured. 1976 was the last time, according to an expert economist I heard last night on television. I think it was the Rachel Maddow show. 1976 was the last time we had income equality in this country. And since then, the gap between the 1% of people who have money, and they've made money during the pandemic even, and people at lower echelons of society is the largest gap that it's ever been. So I think that there has to be a way to have programs inside prison that turn things around so people are ready to exit prison, and then the families on the outside are supported and get help when a prisoner comes home.
They're, to me, the most important thing. People automatically assume rehabilitation is prison programs. You get involved in this program or that program, that the program is going to rehabilitate you. There's no prison program, self-help or institutional sponsored program that is going to rehabilitate inmates. It ain't going to happen. If I know nothing else, I know prison and I know inmates. There are essentially three levels of inmates. They're the ones, and they're mostly involved in the gang activity, organized gang activity, criminal wrongdoing. They live by a set of criminal values. They used to be known as a convict code. Now it's just a value system that's recognized by gangs. And there's the other inmates, those that would like to get out of prison and stay out of prison. Some of them are always not successful at it. More of them are more successful than not. What drives the recidivism rate is those who are involved in that organized, not mafia type stuff, but just organized criminal activity, whether it's drug dealing at the street level or at the gang level. You know, they involved in some kind of organized criminal activity. But the rest of the inmates, and I'd say they're the bulk of the inmates, roughly 65 to 70% of those regular, ordinary, everyday inmates do not want to come back. They don't want to be in prison. They would like to improve in prison, and they would like to go home and stay home. There's that third class of prisoner, and these are those, and I'm not using this in necessarily a derogatory way. There's the sex offenders. They're a whole different class of inmates. Sex offenders, I don't even believe should be in a prison system. I don't even believe they should be thought of as prisoners. There should be forensic hospital settings where these inmates are dealt with in a completely different way. And I'm not talking about psychotropic medications and shocking the penis with electricity and feeding them child porn to, try to get their mind right. Now, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where they're treated as human beings, and you have a mental health system in place that tries to understand why they're the way they are and how to change the way they are. But that main body of inmates, if you give them a skill, and that skill can be a vocational skill or it can be a technical skill. But if you give an inmate a skill, and particularly in vocational training, because a lot of inmates are limited in the education that they have, and they're limited in their ability to understand the tech world. But they understand how to work on cars, and they understand how to do woodwork, and they understand how to do electrical work. And if you can train these inmates through vocational training programs, Angola, as bad as that prison was, had a vocational training program that had a success rate of 92%. Only 8% of the inmates who went through their vocational program and got out recidivated. The rest of them stayed out because they had a skill. Most inmates don't want a life of crime. Those that see life of crime as an opportunity are those that see they want the money, they want the pastime, they want the drugs, they want that whole criminal lifestyle. But that's not the main part of your quote unquote criminals. Time magazine reported a couple of years ago that 75% of all crime in this country is committed by 25% of the criminals. So most crime is committed by those people who are part of that, what I call organized criminal activity. They are the ones that's committing the crime. And they're going to continue that pattern even after they get in prison and get out. Eventually, the way that they will get out and the only way that they will stay out is when they go through criminal menopause. When they reach that age where they can't do any more time, the system has beat the fuck out of them. And they reach a point of, hey, I do not want to die in here. I do not want to spend what little I've done spent 2/3 of my life in here, and I don't want to stay anymore. And that's when they'll make the hard decision of figuring out a way to stay out there. So that's a self-choice. That's not an institutional imposed choice. That's a self-choice that the inmate makes on his own. Well, that's the same thing that 70% make. They want to get out and they want to stay out. Just give them a way, because most of these inmates come up through educational systems that were deprived. They did not have, the African-American, Hispanic inmates did not have the same educational opportunities as inmates, as white kids. And so they're going to be around an environment that's going to make them more prone to criminal activity. And then when they get into the prison setting, even in the prison setting, they're not going to have the same equal opportunity as self-help change programs as white inmates are. So there's a lot of areas of reform. But the thing about it, you got to equip a man with a skill before he gets out. And then once he gets out, groups like Unincarcerated Productions and other groups like that, community groups like that, can help them reintegrate into society, land them jobs, land them places to stay, get them situated back on their feet, make them independent. And that's what they want. And that's not being done with most inmates. Believe me, if it hadn't have been for Jodie, I would have remained in my underwear in New York City, froze to death. That's just the reality.
Vic, do you still, this is a long, long, long time, but can do this another time. But you asked me what was the car ride like when I got the call out of the clear blue at my office on a Monday afternoon. He's been paroled, go get him.
Yeah, talk about it. Like we still have a little bit of time. You have time, Cam, right?
Okay. I was at the office where I was working, and I got a call from Billy's brother, and he said, Billy's been paroled. And he called me because he didn't have any way to call you. So I went in, to the management, and very nice woman there. And I said, I have a family emergency and I need to go. And she said, fine. So I got in the car. I think I had to drive about 120 miles or something like that from Houston to this prison in eastern Louisiana. So I don't remember too much about driving over there, except I got a call from some reporter who or the warden who said that some reporter wanted to talk to me. And I said, I don't want to talk to any reporters. Neither of us do. So get to the prison, walk in there, and there's Billy sitting. And he'd always been extremely well groomed. The clothes he had on were horrible. I mean, the jeans had shreds in them, and and they didn't seem to me like they were even clean. And he had on shoes that the soles, they went flip flop every time he walked. And I thought, what happened to you? And I was so elated when he told me everything he had, his clothes, his
radio,
anything he had, he left for the young inmates.
All the food, everything that I had, I accumulated all those years.
Right. He left.
I left it.
He left everything from them, and then he got some clothes.
Got on the worst rags I could find,
and they didn't even fit. I mean, some things were too big, and all this kind of stuff. So we thanked the warden, and we left, and we went out to the car. And I said, now this is the way the seatbelt works. Okay, this is your side of the car. This is the way the seatbelt works. And so I got him belted in, and he had asked me for some particular piece of music he wanted.
Keith Urban's Headed for a Better Life.
Right. He wanted to. So I had that CD, and so we left. And we're driving, and he keeps looking in the rearview mirror, and I said, what is the matter with you? Well, we were still in Louisiana. He was afraid he was going to see red lights chasing us down the road and pulling us over the side to take him back to the prison. And when we crossed over the border into Texas was the first time I saw him really, really relax. And of course, by then it was getting late in the day, twilight. So this huge interstate, 4 lanes wide on either side. And, I come around and make a big circle into downtown Houston. And his eyes were, big around as plates. He had never been in an urban environment like that. Houston's not New York City, but I mean, it is a big place with huge skyscrapers and all this kind of stuff. And so because I lived in a high-rise condo on the very edge of downtown, I mean, literally it was in downtown, I got off the interstate, pulled around, drove into the garage. And all of a sudden, there's panic on the other side of the car. What is this place? He thought that it was like the garage
like
of
underground to a jail. You're going
courthouse or a jail or something like that. I said, this is the garage. We live upstairs. So I drove around for 3, 4 to level 5, parked the car. We get out of the car. He has hardly anything with him because, and I have a card to open the door so I can get out of the garage into the building. We get in the elevator. He's just completely astonished. He's just astonished at this. So we get off the elevator. We go down to 1613, which was my condo. We open the door. We go in there. It's got antiques. It's got flowers. It's got plants.
Beautiful.
It's got, and then this huge picture window looking out at downtown. And he just got tears in his eyes. He said, all of this, you did this for me. You did this. It makes me cry. You did this for me. And so he had said something about eating out because he's a foodie. I said, no, I'm going to fix something here. And I gave him a bathrobe. He never had a bathrobe in his life, but I had bought it years before so I could hang it in the closet and know that one day he would come home. So I fixed dinner. He ate dinner. While I'm fixing dinner, he goes in and takes a bath in this very small shower and knocked a towel rack off because he'd never been in a shower like that. Then he eats dinner in his bathrobe. And then I say, now, here's the bedroom. And I show him the bed. And I said, now, that's your side of the bed. It's a big queen size bed, whatever. And I left to do something else. And I came back. And this man is dead to the world. It's like he's in a coma. He fell into a sleep so deep because it was the first time in 40 years he could go to sleep at peace and know that he was safe and that he was okay.
When I sat on the bed and she walked out, I went to lay down on the pillow with a nice, nothing like a prison pillow. And just before my head hit that pillow, I was gone. I was utterly out of this world. But one of the things that frustrated me the most, and I cursed that elevator over and over and over again, is getting on that goddamn elevator and knowing which way to turn when I got off. You're on there with other people who know where they're going. I'd get on the elevator and I'd just say I was going down to floor 6 to the gym to exercise. Well, when you get off the elevator, you turn right. You get on the elevator, you're thinking you turn left. And I was always turning the wrong way. When I was supposed to go right, I was turning left. When I was supposed to go left, I was turning right.
The elevator was in the center of the building. So obviously when you got off the elevator, and there were other elevators right there, and you get off the elevator, do I go right or do I go left? That was his dilemma. And I had no idea he was going through that.
Yeah, I mean, it was finally I said, I'm gonna study this. I'm gonna watch what these people do. There's got to be a system for knowing how to get off a goddamn elevator. And finally, I got it down pat. I knew when and how to get off. You know?
But it was a wonderful place for him to come home to because there was a security guard. You couldn't just drive into the garage. You had to have your security card so the board would go up so that you could drive up into there. There was a security guard at the front gate. So he was secure in an environment where he could begin to understand how to work into the free world. And it was, now we live way out in the country on 4 acres, out in the hills with lots of horses around on ranches and stuff like that. But it was an ideal place for him to come home to.
Beyond the condo, once I mastered the condo and the building, and they had a train system that took me straight to the college. And I got that down pat. I knew where to get off and where to make the exchange and everything. The one thing that, and this was for a couple of years, it was that way for a couple of years, were the sounds and the speed of things, coming to terms with the noise of a city and the speed in which everything moved and the casualness in which the way people lived and handled. I mean, they would go to a supermarket as if it was taking a shower. I would go to the supermarket, and in my head, it was an adventure. Not only did I want to get as much food as I could get, and I had the means to buy this food, I didn't no longer have a $90 prison budget. I mean, I could go in that store and buy what I want, and there was so much that I wanted. You know, I would buy stuff just to keep it to have it. So it's learning these kind of things when you get out that, you know, you don't realize that prison has robbed you of your sense of space, your sense of distance, your sense of timing, you know. But then after a while, you just become another knucklehead in society.
And you're grateful for it.
Yes.
You're grateful for it. But there are a whole lot of issues and different things that we could discuss. And our hope is that in terms of this podcast, because I think to a certain extent, I mean, I've lived long enough to know that I'm not entirely unique, but I would say to a certain extent, there aren't many couples who've had the experiences that we have had. And both of us have a compulsion to try to help other people based on the experiences that we've had. And then not only help other people, but then explain to people who don't really understand what life is like in prison, what life is like as an inmate's wife, mother, sister, and that kind of thing. They have no understanding of what in families of inmates go through. They have no understanding of what an inmate is or is capable of, and so forth. So Billy and I really do feel compelled to talk about those really, really important issues. I will say one thing, and I did put this in the book, about halfway through all of this, I realized, and I don't know if I could share this with other people so that they would understand it, but hope was the killer that was stalking me, because every time there was a disappointment in terms of those pardon board hearings until he finally got clemency, and 7 parole hearings in which he was denied 6 times. It lifts you up and then it slams you down. It slams you down again and again to the point that emotionally you're really battered. And so that's when I learned, I don't know that other people end up married to a prisoner as long as I did, probably some do. That's when I realized that you need to give up hope. You really do. You need to keep working toward your goal, but you can't let yourself be damaged emotionally like that over and over again. I remember one parole board hearing, and that is in my book, Love Behind Bars, The True Story of an American Prisoner's Wife. The parole board, it was the prison in North Louisiana, the parole board was going to vote for parole. So they stopped the hearing, recessed the hearing, and they flew in a man from Louisiana who was another parole board member who was going to vote against Billy. So it was a 2-1 vote. And that is the kind of thing that we were up against. And that's, when I finally concluded, look, you can't live on hope. You cannot live on hope. You have to live on something else. You have to learn to a certain extent to enjoy life from day to day. You got these nice jobs, these nice people, this, etc. You keep fighting. You never give up.
And that's the one thing that.
But the hope, you got to be careful because hope can become toxic.
And see, I was sort of the opposite. From that death row cell to the day I walked out of prison, I always looked at the glass being half full, not half empty, but half full. And if you could possess the ability and the strength to every day, day in and day out, wake up and realize the glass was half full, you could put one foot before the other and you could get through that day. And those days turned into months. And those months turned into years.
A lot of years.
And we made it. We made it.
There is a book called The Impossible Will Take a Little While. And the author's last name was Loeb. And he asked Billy to write an essay. And these are all stories of people who come up against almost insurmountable odds. And Billy was the only prisoner who wrote a piece for that book called The Road to Redemption. But since our book came out, they took his typewriter away from him, and they took typewriters away from every prisoner because they didn't want any more prisoners writing books. There also was the Sinclair rule, which they put into effect after he exposed the terrible relationship between the Chief Justice of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and a pedophile priest. And the Sinclair rule, they never allowed him to do another interview again. So I had to become his voice. And I remember writing him toward the end of the 25 years, a couple of years before he got paroled, when I told him, stand back, let me step forward. I wrote him about what Stonewall Jackson, that Confederate general, said after he was mortally wounded at a battle. Let us cross over the river and rest in the shade of the trees. And he did. He didn't file any more lawsuits. We just sort of worked really hard on the medical issues and, getting him out. But it was, I could see the fatigue in his eyes. That's why I told him that,
I actually lived in peace those last 2 years. It was a medium custody facility. I didn't feel any threat. I was well accepted by the inmates. I worked in the prison library. Gone were the days of being a famous, celebrated inmate. I was just another inmate. Had sort of grown old and knew at that time that I had a release date. And I knew if nothing else that in 2011, I would get out. And so we're talking about it. I was there from 2004 to 2006, and I was released on parole. But I had a good time parole release date and set for April 2011. So at least there was that light at the end of the tunnel. I knew most I'd serve is 45 years. So the last couple of years I was in the system, I had some medical issues, but I was at peace. I lay down in that dormitory, no matter what the situation was, had no problem sleeping. All the inmates there knew me, give me plenty of room, give me plenty of respect, got along with all of them. Even 90% of the guards knew me, knew my background, and they didn't bother me, let me be. So, Jodie carried us through those last 2 years. She put me in the back of the wagon. I was glad to be there, and she brought us home.
This podcast comes from Unincarcerated Productions and Grindle Industries. Every episode of Justice Delayed is produced and edited by Cameron Collins and Milo Bershane. Music on this episode is from Speculation. Learn more and check out Spec at speculation.bandcamp.com. That's spekulation.bandcamp.com. And of course, Head on over to unincarcerated.com to find out more about Unincarcerated Productions. We will see you all next time for episode 1 of Justice Delayed.